Find the most comfortable seat and maybe bring a warm cup of tea or your favorite treat. This moment is just for you. Take a deep breath and let's step gently into the story together. The letter beneath the magnolia tree. The arrival. The girl who didn't belong. The dusty road into Willow Creek seemed to stretch endlessly, cutting through groves of pine trees that stood like quiet sentinels in the golden light of late afternoon. A car rattled down the road, its tires stirring soft clouds of red-brown dust into the humid Georgia air. In the passenger seat, 18-year-old Eleanor Whitfield leaned against the window, her cheek pressed to the glass as she watched the green world roll by with a mixture of disinterest and silent rebellion. She missed the city, the tall buildings, the clatter of streetcars, the hum of energy. None of that existed here. Here, it was the chirping of cicadas, the occasional creak of the forest, and the way the wind whispered through the needles of the longleaf pines. Her parents had sent her to live with her grandparents for the summer, though Eleanor suspected it would be longer than that. Their hushed voices and worried glances back in the apartment told her everything she needed to know. Eleanor's grandfather, Samuel, was waiting by the wooden gate when they arrived. A tall man with a slow smile and eyes that saw too much, he welcomed her with a quiet hug and no questions. Her grandmother, Mabel, stood on the wide front porch, wiping her hands on her apron and waving, her graying hair pulled into a loose bun. The house stood like something out of a memory. Whitewashed wood faded to cream with a gently sagging roof, and wind chimes that sang softly in the breeze. It had a front porch, the kind Eleanor had only ever seen in picture books. A swing, a rocking chair, and a table holding an old clay pot filled with wild flowers. Beyond the house, the pine woods stretched out in every direction, their shadows long and deep. Unloading her suitcase felt like unpacking disappointment. The guest room was clean and quiet, smelling faintly of cedar and old quilts. A small window looked out onto the trees, and beneath it, a desk covered in faded writing paper and half-used pencils. She didn't bother unpacking everything. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. Fireflies blinked in and out like memories. Mabel poured sweet tea and offered a plate of biscuits. Eleanor listened politely, nodded, and answered when spoken to. Inside, she ached. The first few days passed in a slow, sticky rhythm. Samuel took early morning walks, sometimes inviting her, which she declined. Mabel tended the small garden out back and prepared hearty meals from scratch. Eleanor wandered. Sometimes she took the path into the woods, staying close enough to see the house but far enough to feel alone. It was on one of these walks that she first noticed the magnolia tree. It stood alone near the creek bed, where the woods thinned out and the sunlight filtered down in beams. Its branches were heavy with fragrant white blossoms, and beneath it lay a bench worn smooth with age. Something about it felt expectant, like it was waiting. She found herself returning there. One morning, after a particularly restless night filled with half-remembered dreams, Eleanor went back to the magnolia tree and noticed something buried at the base, just barely visible in the soft soil. She dug with her hands, uncovering an old metal tin. Inside, a folded letter, yellowed with age. The handwriting was looping and elegant. To the one who finds this, you are not the first, nor will you be the last. This place remembers. Listen closely, and it will tell you its story. There was no name, no date. Eleanor read it twice, her fingers trembling slightly. Her heart beat faster. Not out of fear, but something else. Anticipation, curiosity. A feeling that something just beyond understanding had brushed past her. She looked up at the tree. The wind moved its branches gently. A single blossom drifted down and landed beside the tin. That evening, she asked her grandmother about the tree. "Oh, that old thing?" Mabel chuckled. "People around here say it's been there forever. Used to be part of someone's land long before this house was built. Folks say it's a wishing tree. Silly, really." But Eleanor didn't think it was silly. As the days stretched on, Eleanor began to keep a notebook. She wrote about the tree, about the letter, about the strange pull she felt every time she sat beneath its boughs. She explored the woods more boldly, sketching old fences, worn-down stone paths, and overgrown clearings that seemed to whisper stories if she sat long enough. One afternoon, she followed the creek farther than usual and stumbled upon a clearing filled with wildflowers, lavender, goldenrod, and delicate bluebells. The air was thick with the buzz of bees and the warm hum of summer. In the center stood a rusted mailbox, its red flag still upright. Inside was another letter, this one sealed. It read only, "For Eleanor." Her breath caught. She looked around, but the woods were still. No sign of anyone. Her fingers hesitated on the seal, then tore it open. Inside was a single sentence. "You've come home." That night, she sat on the porch swing long after the others had gone to bed. The wind moved softly through the trees, and the cicadas sang their slow, rhythmic songs. She held the letter in her lap, her thoughts spiraling. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But something inside her shifted. The boredom had been replaced by wonder. The ache of missing the city dulled by the whisper of something waiting in the woods. And for the first time since she arrived in Willow Creek, Eleanor felt like she wasn't just passing through. She was part of something. Something just beginning. The house that listens. The next morning began like any other in Willow Creek. Slow, quiet, with light filtering through gauzy curtains and the smell of warm biscuits drifting in from the kitchen. Eleanor had barely touched her tea when Samuel looked up from his newspaper. "You're up early today," he said, voice calm but observant. Eleanor gave a small shrug. Couldn't sleep. The words were true, though incomplete. Her mind had been circling the letter from the mailbox all night. "You've come home." It rang like an echo in her mind, soft but unrelenting. That day, she returned to the woods with her notebook tucked under her arm. As she reached the clearing with the wildflowers, she noticed something she hadn't before. The old path that stretched behind the mailbox. It was subtle, covered in moss and creeping vines, but unmistakably there. She followed it. It led deeper into the trees, the sound of the creek growing fainter with each step. The air felt cooler, heavier. After 10 minutes of walking, Eleanor reached a small rise. There, hidden in a natural alcove of ivy and pine, stood a structure. It wasn't quite a house, more like a forgotten cabin. Roof sagging, door ajar, windows cracked and fogged with age. Vines crawled over its surface, but the wood beneath looked strangely intact. Her heart quickened. Inside it was dim and dusty, but not abandoned. The table in the corner still had books stacked on it. A coat hung from a hook by the door. On the windowsill, a faded photograph faced outward, as if watching the forest. Eleanor stepped inside, brushing cobwebs aside. Her footsteps were soft but distinct. She picked up one of the books, a diary. The cover was cracked leather, and the first page bore a name she didn't recognize. Clara Alden. She flipped through pages filled with entries, short, observant. Clara wrote of watching birds, of tending a small garden, of listening to the voices in the walls. The tone was gentle, poetic, not mad. The final entry, however, was a single sentence. The window still hasn't closed. Eleanor closed the book slowly, her fingers trembling. Over the next few days, Eleanor returned to the cabin again and again. Each time she discovered something new: a stack of letters in the drawer, a box of pressed wild flowers, a map with hand-drawn notations of the surrounding forest. Clara had lived here, possibly decades ago, and had documented everything. Shifts in wind, blooming patterns, even the distant sound of train whistles on foggy nights. Eleanor began piecing together Clara's life. The woman had been young, not much older than Eleanor herself. Based on dates in the letters, she had lived in the 1930s. The contents suggested she had moved here from the city, escaping something unspoken. There were gaps, moments of silence between the entries, but a thread pulled through them, a fascination with the woods, with the house, and with the sense that the land itself was alive. One afternoon, while tracing the hand-drawn map, Eleanor found a second trail that curved east toward a grove of ancient trees. There, beneath the roots of a particularly large pine, she found a small wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a locket and another letter, this one sealed with wax. It read, "Clara, if you find this, then I never made it back. You were right. The house remembers, and so does the land. Keep listening. H." Eleanor stared at the signature. Just an initial, but it changed everything. Clara hadn't been alone. That evening, she spoke with Samuel. "Did you ever hear of someone named Clara Alden? Or a house past the creek?" He raised an eyebrow but didn't speak at first. Then, slowly, "My grandmother used to tell stories about a woman who lived out there. Said she kept to herself, that she talked to the trees. Folks thought she was strange. Kind, though. Had a way of making people feel seen." Eleanor leaned forward. "Did anyone ever say what happened to her? Just that one day she was gone." The silence between them thickened. Mabel, who had been listening quietly from the kitchen, spoke. "Sometimes we don't choose to leave. Sometimes we're called." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her bed, the letter and the locket on her nightstand. Wind passed gently through the open window, carrying the scent of pine and old magnolia blossoms. She thought of Clara, of the way she had documented everything with such care, of the way her story had been quietly buried, waiting to be unearthed. Eleanor rose, walked to her desk, and opened her notebook. She began to write, not just observations now, but memories, feelings, questions. It began with, "The window still hasn't closed. Beneath the floorboards, By now, Eleanor's days had taken on a rhythm. Mornings were spent in the stillness of the woods. Afternoons combing through Clara's letters and journals, and evenings writing down her thoughts in the soft golden light of the porch. What had started as a summer of exile had transformed into something stranger and deeper. A mystery that asked not to be solved, but understood. The house in the woods no longer felt foreign. Eleanor moved through it like someone dusting off a forgotten room of her own memory. She spoke aloud when she read Clara's entries, letting the words hang in the air. She watered the plants by the sill, even though most were long dead. She kept the windows open. One afternoon, Eleanor returned to the house to find the wind had scattered pages across the floor. The back door was ajar, though she had closed it. Her breath caught. She stepped inside cautiously, calling out once. Nothing. Gathering the pages, she noticed one she didn't recognize. It was a letter. Newer. Folded tightly. You're not wrong to ask. Clara did too. Keep going. H. Her heart pounded. Who was H? Still alive? Or was this an echo from the past? The handwriting didn't match Clara's. Was someone else reading her notebook? Had they been here? Were they watching now? That night, Eleanor couldn't eat. She sat at the table with Samuel and Mabel, stirring her peas, lost in thought. Finally, she asked, "Did Clara ever write to anyone?" Samuel set down his fork. She used to leave notes for the delivery man. I heard he fancied her. Can't say I ever met him. Do you remember his name? Henry, I think. Henry Alcott. Mabel's eyebrows raised slightly. He was a kind man. Quiet. Kept a journal, I believe. That night, Eleanor dreamt of a long hallway, lined with doors. Each one bore her name, written in a different hand. The next day, Eleanor returned to the town's tiny historical society building, a single-story brick structure with creaky floors and sun-faded photographs on the walls. Mrs. Thompson greeted her with a smile. "I was wondering when you'd be back," she said, pushing a small box across the desk. Found this while organizing the archive room. Don't know why, but it made me think of you. Inside the box were yellowed envelopes and 2 leather-bound journals. Eleanor opened the first and saw the name written inside. Henry Alcott. He had written about the woods, about deliveries, about Clara. Met her at the porch again. She was barefoot. Said the trees were talking louder than usual. Asked me if I could hear them. Another entry. She left a parcel at the gate. Said I'd know what to do with it. Inside was a compass and a page with a single sentence. There are places the sun forgets. The second journal was shorter. It ended abruptly with a map, and beneath the map, a scrawled note. If the window is still open, you must look beneath the floorboards. Eleanor rushed to the house. The sky was heavy with gray, the kind of weather that made the pine trees whisper a little louder. Inside the house, she stood in the center of the floor, staring at the boards. Where to begin? Then she remembered something Clara had written. The rug is a liar. She yanked the faded rug back, revealing older wood beneath, slightly uneven. A knot in one board looked different. With trembling hands, she pried it loose. Dust filled the air. Inside the hollow space beneath the floor were several items: a folded blanket, a small metal tin, a book with no title, and a bundle of letters bound with twine. She opened the tin first. Inside were pressed wildflowers, nearly turned to dust, and a photograph. Clara and Henry sitting beneath the magnolia tree, smiling. Eleanor stared at the image. Clara had always been alone in her mind, but she wasn't. She had loved and been loved. The book with no title was filled with poems, some in Clara's hand, others in Henry's. On the final page, written in pencil, were the words, "The house keeps our stories, and if you're reading this, you're part of them now." Back at home, Eleanor showed the photo to Mabel. Mabel smiled slowly. "That's Clara, all right. And Henry. I was just a child, but I remember seeing them once at the fair. They looked like a storybook." Why did no one talk about them? Mabel's eyes softened. Sometimes, the things we hold dearest are the ones we protect in silence. Eleanor nodded slowly. She understood now. That night, she wrote one last entry in her notebook. The window never closed. It was never meant to. It was meant to welcome. As summer drew to a close, Eleanor found herself no longer waiting to return to the city. The woods had become familiar, the silence comforting. She continued to visit the house, now no longer forgotten but alive with memory. She tended to the magnolia tree, planted new wildflowers, left letters in the mailbox. She didn't need replies. The house had already answered. And on nights when the wind moved just right, she sat by her open window, notebook in hand, knowing that somewhere in the quiet dark, another story had just begun. The letters we leave behind. The first chill of early autumn crept through Willow Creek like a whisper, brushing across the porch where Eleanor sat curled in a worn blanket. The magnolia blossoms had begun to fall, their creamy petals resting softly on the damp earth. Smoke from Samuel's fireplace drifted lazily upward, and in the distance, owls called to one another beneath the canopy of pine. It had been nearly 3 months since Eleanor first arrived in Willow Creek, but the sharp edges of her reluctance had softened into something like belonging. The city felt distant now, not forgotten, but dulled by the richness of the days spent listening, observing, feeling. In the drawer beside her bed, she kept the letters. Clara's, Henry's, her own. She had begun to write as they had, not only about what she saw, but what she sensed, the shift in wind before a storm, the way the floor creaked differently at night, the sound of pine needles underfoot. Her notebook was now a reflection of the place itself, a quiet witness to memory. One morning, Mabel handed her a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "It came for you," she said, with a knowing look. There was no return address. Inside, Eleanor found an old compass and a folded note. "Some paths don't end, they wait. Thank you for walking ours. H." Her hands trembled as she held the compass. The needle spun for a moment, then stilled, pointing not north, but toward the window, toward the woods, toward the house. Eleanor made one final journey that day. The path through the trees was damp with dew, the moss brighter under the shifting sky. She wore Henry's compass around her neck and carried a new letter in her coat pocket. Her boots made little sound as she stepped into the clearing. The house waited, quiet and unchanged. She walked through the rooms, now familiar. The air held a scent of earth and pine. She placed the letter in the drawer beneath the floorboards, beside Clara's locket and Henry's journal. Her letter read, "To the next soul who finds this, you are not lost, you are beginning. The house knows. The window never closed. We leave our stories behind for a reason. Trust yours." She lingered only a moment longer, then gently shut the floorboard and laid the rug back in place. In the days that followed, Eleanor felt no need for answers. She knew now that some mysteries weren't meant to be solved, but held like a breath or a promise. She kept writing, kept walking the woods, kept listening. And others began to listen too. Mrs. Thompson asked to read her notebook. Samuel offered to walk with her to the magnolia tree. Mabel left a folded poem on Eleanor's desk, signed only with her initials. The house had grown bigger in her absence, not in size, but in story. And it was no longer only Clara's house, or Henry's. It was Eleanor's too. On the morning of her planned return to the city, Eleanor sat at the edge of the porch, suitcase beside her. The taxi wouldn't arrive for another hour, but she was already saying goodbye. Samuel sat beside her, sipping coffee. "You know," he said, "you don't have to leave it all behind." Eleanor nodded. "I'm not. It's part of me now." She looked out toward the trees, sunlight slicing through the branches in warm, golden lines. "Maybe I'll come back," she said. Samuel smiled. "Maybe you never really left." The wind stirred the chimes above them, and from the woods, far in the quiet distance, a door creaked open and shut again. A sound like memory closing gently behind someone. A sound like a story continuing, unseen. Weeks later, a young traveler arrived in Willow Creek. They had heard of a quiet town tucked between pine forests and old stories, a place where people spoke gently and the nights were long and soft. They rented a room from Mabel. And on their second morning, they found a letter beneath the magnolia tree. "To the one who finds this, you are not the first, nor will you be the last. This place remembers. Listen closely, and it will tell you its story."